Sign it now or it's your reputation, Tyler said, slapping the compliance certificate onto my desk like he was throwing down a winning poker hand. I stared at the blue folder, at the exact line where my name, my legal authority, was printed in black ink, and I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He didn't read the policy. He didn't care about the clause. He wanted a signature, not a standard. I'd been here 10 years. He'd been here 10 days. And yet somehow, I was the problem. Just keep optics clean, he said again, like the optics mattered more than the truth beneath them. My throat went dry, but not with fear. With fury, I'd trained into silence over a decade. I tapped the corner of the form with my pen. Per 7A, the designated officer must be compensated in full before certifying renewal. I haven't been. His smirk didn't waver. We're reallocating. Budgets need flexibility. You'll still get your bonus, eventually. He said it like a promise made in a diner parking lot. Then he added the cherry. Come on, be a team player. Let me be clear. This wasn't a team. This was a one-way door with a smile on the front and a blade on the back. He'd slashed my retention bonus the same week he bought himself a standing desk and gave a TED talk in the break room about operational velocity. I didn't say no. I didn't argue. I just replied by email. Unable to sign under current conditions, terms unchanged per 7A. Within 5 minutes, he dropped a thumbs up under it in Slack like this was some kind of motivational Monday. If you're listening right now and haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. 97% of folks who hear these stories don't subscribe, and honestly, that's the only thing that keeps our team caffeinated and slightly less cynical. Give it a like too, unless you're Tyler. Back in the office, the clock was ticking. My certification window, per our own internal SOP, expired at noon Friday. If I didn't sign, the buyer wouldn't release funds. And if I did sign under non-compliance, that was fraud, plain and prosecutable. I wasn't going to jail so someone could hit Q4 optics, but Tyler didn't see it that way. No one cares about your paperwork, he told me in front of legal, HR, and a painfully silent finance lead. Just sign the thing. I turned to legal. Section 7A, am I wrong? The GC fidgeted, then said, well, technically, she's right, but that but hung there like a rope at the gallows. I had no illusions about what was coming. This wasn't my first new manager with too much gel and not enough policy training, but I had always played quiet, safe, accommodating, not this time, because buried inside that certificate wasn't just my name. It was liability, authority, risk. And if I signed it under these terms, I'd be the one they'd pin when the buyer's team started asking questions. Tyler leaned in, eyes twinkling like he'd already won. Don't make this a thing, he whispered. I smiled and leaned back. Too late. The morning it was set to expire, I sat at my desk watching the seconds bleed off my screen like a slow leak in a sinking ship. 11:07 a.m., my inbox was full of forwarded threads with subject lines like urgent, buyer cert needed, and status update, as if volume could replace process. I clicked one open. Legal had looped in someone from the buyer's side, attaching the old cert with a note. We're assuming this auto-renews, correct? I didn't reply. I stood up, walked 2 doors down to the GC's office, and handed him a printed copy of our own rider, red line from the last acquisition. Line 14. The designated officer must sign voluntarily, without duress, and must be compensated as contracted. Signature without compliance voids the certificate. I didn't make the rule. I just wrote the policy that made it enforceable. He read it twice. Well, shit, he said finally, scratching the back of his head like maybe a migraine had just walked in uninvited. Does Tyler know about this? I didn't blink. He initialed it during onboarding. I sent it again yesterday. He responded with a thumbs up. The GC didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, like a man realizing the fire drill wasn't a drill. The real issue wasn't the certificate. It was the $280 million waiting behind it like a freight train at a red light. The buyer's release clause was crystal clear. No cert, no wire. And the cert wasn't valid unless I signed it. And I wasn't signing it unless someone fixed the fact that I was still, per payroll, listed as bonus withheld pending review. Review by whom? Tyler? The man who thought compliance was just vibes in a binder? At 11:24 a.m., the CFO pinged me. Can you just sign it now? We'll fix your comp retroactively. I stared at the message like it was a prank. I replied, "Would you sign a mortgage if the loan officer said you'd probably get the rate you wanted after closing?" No response. They didn't understand, maybe refused to understand, that this wasn't an ego thing. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the damn process, about risk, about the fact that if I put my name on a document while the conditions of my role were actively being violated, I was giving them permission to lie. And not just to the buyer, but to every shareholder, every regulator, every audit trail tied to that deal. By 11:33, legal tried another angle. "Is there anyone else who can sign?" the associate asked me via Teams, clearly typing while on mute in a Zoom call she hadn't been invited to speak in. "Only if they're the named designated officer," I replied, and then dropped the board resolution PDF in the chat. My name. Effective through end of year, unless reassigned with 90-day transition. No transition had occurred. No reassignment had been filed. Which meant I was it. I was the lock. And they had misplaced the key. Outside my window, the city looked like it always did. Indifferent. People rushing to meetings, holding overpriced coffee, pretending their lives weren't being shaped by unseen hands holding invisible pens. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. 10 years in this role, and only now did they realize what I protected, what I built, what I was to this machine. At 11:41, a calendar invite popped up. Emergency hold call, 12:05 p.m. I clicked accept. And then I turned off notifications. Let them scramble. I'd already set the clock. When it struck noon, that certificate would flip to expired. And then, only then, would they realize that calling someone paperwork doesn't make the paper any less lethal when it's missing. 12 p.m. on the dot. The system ran like clockwork because I built it to. No reminders, no backdoors, no oops buttons. Just a quiet little timer that flipped the compliance certificate from valid to expired in red, full caps, like a fire alarm that only lawyers and deal makers could hear. The moment it did, my calendar lit up like a Christmas tree. I muted the Teams chime before the fifth notification. By 12:04, the buyer's auditor had joined the emergency call. His voice was dry, flat, like a man who had once believed in miracles and now drank black coffee instead. "We have a hold." He didn't say hello. Compliance certificate expired at noon. He paused, then held up the document to his webcam. Signed previously by... He looked down. "Elaine Myers." Then straight into the camera. "That's you?" I nodded once. "Still is." He pointed at the corner where the digital watermark had flipped. "This stamp means expired. Why?" Before I could open my mouth, Tyler's voice cut in like a weed whacker chewing through sanity. "She's blocking progress," he snapped. "This is just internal confusion. We're resolving it." I unmuted slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the silence to make him sweat. "Actually," I said, calm and crisp, "I'm following your policy." The auditor blinked. "Explain." I did. Cleanly, surgically. "Our internal policy, Section 7A, states that the designated officer must be compensated as contracted in order to authorize renewal. I haven't been. Therefore, I'm not authorized. I also cannot lawfully delegate my authority unless a 90-day transition plan is filed with the board. That hasn't happened. So the expiration was automatic, built into the compliance logic for system integrity." He said nothing, but I saw him write something down. Tyler leaned forward, trying to inject some kind of synthetic charm into his voice. "We didn't think a small delay in her bonus constituted a breach." The auditor cut him off without looking up. "It does." Silence. I kept my breathing steady. My hands were folded, no trembling. But I could feel the thrum in my ribs, the adrenaline tracing cold outlines inside my skin. My whole career had led to this moment. And it wasn't a speech or a headline or a plaque on a wall. It was a room full of men finally forced to shut up and listen to a woman they'd labeled support staff until the gears stopped turning. Finance piped up. "We can remedy her compensation immediately. Can we get a temporary override?" "No," the auditor said, still neutral, still deadly. "The certificate states, officer must be paid as contracted. You chose the terms. She didn't." Tyler tried one last time. "This is procedural nitpicking. We're talking about a $280 million deal. We can't stop it for red tape. Your red tape, I said flatly. You cut it, and now there's nothing holding the weight. The auditor looked up. We're freezing the buyer release until this is corrected. Please notify the stakeholders. And just like that, the air thinned. Tyler's face twitched. Legal stared at their shoes. Finance started typing like their lives depended on it, which, to be fair, they probably did. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat still and let the silence drape over them like a silk shroud. Because sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that made the rules and refused to break them. 12:07 p.m., the access log blinked red across my dashboard, one of the system's failsafes firing like a tripwire. Someone had just attempted to override my signature with a proxy login. A fresh credential tagged internal temp, do not use. Real subtle. The system bounced it in under 5 seconds. Rejection reason, invalid signature chain, missing designated officer key. That key lived on a secure ledger, physical custody, logged, ink signed, and never once handed over in 10 years. Not because I didn't trust the company, because I knew better. I screenshot the log, timestamped it, and dragged it into the shared folder titled Deal Artifacts, Legal View. No comment, no subject line, just proof. Let them stew. Meanwhile, on the call, finance had gone full circus. Funds were reallocated due to operational pivots, the CFO wheezed, trying to dress an open wound with a buzzword bandage. We were going to restore her bonus post-closing, standard deferred comp strategy. I clicked open the rider. Tyler's initials in blue, ugly and rushed, like everything else he touched. Section C, I said aloud. Designated officer compensation must be satisfied before signature. This was added at the buyer's request. Tyler agreed. It's not optional. Silence. Then a polite throat clear from the buyer's auditor. We see that here. You're correct. This clause appears in the binding rider. The terms were approved during diligence. Legal tried to pivot. Would the buyer accept an interim signer? We could delegate temporarily and still meet the timeline. The auditor didn't flinch. Not per your policy. 4 words. Cold enough to frost a server rack. Your governance documentation names one designated officer, requires board approval to change, and enforces a 90-day transition window. There's no workaround. A pause, which, frankly, I respect. I could hear Tyler's breathing through the mic now, tight, shallow, angry. He didn't speak. Legal's junior associate tried to fill the vacuum with filler language. We appreciate the clarity. I took that moment to speak. Calm but scalpel sharp. Let the record show. An unauthorized proxy attempt was made at 12:07 p.m. System access was denied due to missing DO key. I maintain full custody. Any future attempts will be logged and traceable. The GC muttered something about confirming internally, but the room was already on fire. The truth was no longer a matter of discussion. It was evidence. Documented. Immutable. And Tyler? He was sinking. No deck chair, no lifeboat, just the faint realization that charisma doesn't override policy. The auditor's voice came again, crisp and final. The hold remains until all conditions are met. We'll be notifying counsel and our internal compliance team. I sat back in my chair, jaw clenched but heart steady. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was autopsy in real time. And the cause of death? Arrogance laced with ignorance, signed in blue ink by a man who thought efficiency meant skipping the foundation. No one looked at me, not really, but I didn't need their eyes. I had the logs, the writer, the system's refusal to betray its design, and for once, that design was holding, just like I knew it would. The problem with people like Tyler is they think everything runs on personality, smiles, shortcuts, and a little pressure applied at the right time. But I didn't build a personality. I built a system. And systems don't care if you're charming. They care if you follow the damn rules. At 12:16 p.m., I pulled up the custody ledger, the one no one ever asked about because it lived in a locked drawer and required 2 keys, mine and the paralegals. I uploaded a scan of the current page. Entry, Myers, E, signature, wet ink. Timestamp, 6 months ago. Status, active. Underneath that, the control log showed every time the certificate had been removed, signed, and returned. All under my name. No gaps, no duplicates, no ambiguity. Here's the ledger. I said, sharing screen. Physical custody of the signing certificate and access key remains with me. No one else has the authority to act under the compliance charter. Tyler looked like he'd swallowed a screw. We thought it was all digital. No, I cut in. The digital record confirms the signature. It doesn't replace it. Not under our policy. I held up the physical file. One of 2 copies I'd printed in case someone ever tried to bluff their way into my seat. Each attestation requires wet ink execution and outside counsel countersignature, which incidentally also hasn't happened. The auditor leaned forward in his webcam window, face unreadable but clearly alert. You built this yourself? 10 years ago, I nodded. After the FY15 audit flagged a gap in signatory traceability, I drafted the protocol, had it reviewed by outside counsel, and had the board ratify it the same quarter. His lips twitched, half a smile. Impressive. Someone finally coughed on the buyer's side. Legal counsel, I assumed. A woman I hadn't heard speak yet. She asked, "Do you still have a copy of the board resolution naming you designated officer?" I didn't answer. I just dragged the file into the chat. Board Res 2015 due apt Myers PDF. She opened it. Her eyes flicked across the screen as she scrolled, reading aloud, "Shall remain designated officer for all compliance matters unless formally relieved by board action and subject to a 90-day transition period to a successor." Her voice dropped. Was such a transition initiated? I shook my head. No, not requested, not filed, not executed. The screen went quiet. Then the auditor cleared his throat. So, until that process is completed, you are, by policy and designation, the only valid officer who can authorize the compliance certificate? That's correct. Tyler tried to interject. But we assumed. No one cares what you assumed. The buyer's counsel snapped. You signed the rider. You accepted the policy. If your organization failed to follow its own governance, that's your internal failure, not hers. The tide turned with that sentence. It didn't roar. It shifted. Quiet, cold, irreversible. The GC's expression turned to ash. Finance stopped typing. Tyler leaned back in his chair like the oxygen had left the room. I sat steady, hands folded. No need to speak. The facts were doing it for me now. This was what I'd prepared for. Not the conflict, but the moment after, the reckoning. Because locks don't matter when the doors are open. They matter when someone tries to kick them in. And I'd built every hinge, every bolt, every clause for days like this. For the moment the rules would have to speak louder than the noise. 12:34 p.m., Tyler slid into my DMs like a used car salesman trying to offload a lemon in the rain. "Elaine," he typed, "let's be reasonable. I can restore your bonus right now if we just push this through. No one needs to know the backstory." He followed it with a winking emoji, like this was all a little office misunderstanding instead of a $280 million noose tightening around his neck. I didn't respond. Not immediately. I let the cursor blink a few times like a heartbeat counting down his illusion of control. Then I replied with a single sentence. No indemnity, no signature. 2 minutes later, another message. Fine, we'll do indemnity. Just sign now and we'll sort out the rest after. He was unraveling fast, the edges of his sentences frayed. The confidence from earlier, the smug, just sign it posturing was gone. Now he was bargaining like a man standing on a trap door, praying the rope above him phrase first. I switched to group chat and dropped in a new document. Addendum 18B, legal review of due title changes. 1 paragraph. Clean. It required legal counsel to approve all future transitions of the designated officer role, with 30-day advance notice and written board consent. It made sure no one like Tyler could ever pull this stunt again. I sign, I said to the room, when 3 things happen. 1, full indemnity. 2, unpaid bonus plus back pay wired today. 3, board ratification of 18B. No exceptions, no promises, no retroactive fixes. Legal looked to Tyler. Tyler looked to legal. Nobody looked at the clock, but we all heard it. Every minute that passed, equity drained from the deal. Delays this late in a close weren't just expensive. They were radioactive. The buyer's counsel was already twitching. Someone on their side dropped a sigh that felt like a verdict. That's when the texts started hitting Tyler's phone. Ping, ping, ping. I watched him flinch with each one. Probably the investors, ones who had been promised a champagne close by 1 p.m. and now saw their liquidity melting in real time. Then the call shifted. The auditor cleared his throat. At this point, he said slowly, we're issuing a final hold on transaction release until resolution of officer authority, compensation status, and policy compliance. This decision is logged and reportable. I'm CCing Executive Council and the buyer's fiduciary team. He paused. And the seller's CEO directly. That was the turning point, not the threat. The name. Because the CEO had been on vacation, somewhere sunburned and smug, trusting that the children back home wouldn't set the house on fire. And now the fire alarm had reached his private inbox. Tyler's jaw moved like he wanted to object, but no sound came out. His email pinged again. This time, louder somehow. I sat still. My heart thumped steady now, not with adrenaline, but with purpose. It didn't matter if Tyler panicked or postured or pleaded. I wasn't the one holding the deal hostage. I was the one who built the only door out, and they'd padlocked it from the outside without asking if I had the key. And I did. In triplicate. The CEO's return wasn't subtle. His face popped into the video call like a thunderclap in a chapel, hair windblown, eyes raw from sun and jet lag, shirt still wrinkled from a red-eye flight he clearly hadn't planned on taking. The silence that followed his arrival felt like a courtroom about to read a verdict. He didn't bother with greetings. No, sorry I'm late. No, what's the status? Just 5 words, flat and brutal. Please tell me you paid her. Nobody spoke. Not legal, not finance, and especially not Tyler, who looked like he was trying to disappear into his ergonomic chair. The CEO's nostrils flared once. He didn't blink. I said, "Did you pay her?" The GC fumbled. There were contingencies pending. I didn't wait for the excuse. I dragged the writer file back into the chat, then held up the printed version on camera. Highlighted clause, blue ink initials. Tyler's scrawl next to the buyer's compensation conditions, right above the sentence, "Officer must be compensated as contracted or signature is void." And just under that, Tyler's favorite response, "Got it." I slid the page closer to my webcam. The CEO stared at it like it had personally betrayed him. He turned, not to Tyler, but to legal. His voice was quieter now, but somehow colder. "How fast can we fix this? Correctly?" The GC didn't hesitate. "When she signs, on her terms, there's no legal substitute." Another pause. The CEO finally looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. Not like a background process, not like a box checked on an org chart, but like someone who realized too late that the woman he'd left in charge of the spine of the company had been holding the whole skeleton up the entire time. "What do you want?" he asked. I didn't blink. Indemnity, wired back pay, my full bonus reinstated, and board approval of Addendum 18B. I spoke as if reading a grocery list, calm and clipped, and I want all of it in writing. "No NDA?" he asked. "Don't insult me," I replied. The CFO started to speak, probably to argue about optics or precedent or budget strain, but the CEO raised one hand without looking at him. "Draft it," he said to legal. Tyler looked like he might object. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then finally just whispered, "We didn't think she'd," but never finished. He didn't need to. The CEO didn't speak to him. He didn't have to. The shift had already happened. I wasn't overhead anymore. I was the hinge, the pivot point. And Tyler? He wasn't just on thin ice. He was under it, kicking up bubbles, praying someone remembered he used to be impressive in a slide deck. "I want this settled today," the CEO said, already pulling up another window on his screen. "Do whatever she asks. Fix it. And tell HR to prepare transition paperwork." "For who?" the GC asked carefully. The CEO didn't even look up. "Do you really have to ask?" Tyler blinked. Once, twice, then went still. I muted my mic and leaned back, exhaling through my nose as the pressure slid off my spine. The anger was gone now, replaced by something sharper, colder, clearer. They'd called me paperwork. Turns out I was the only page that mattered. 1:44 p.m. The wire confirmation hit my inbox with a quiet chime as if a $250 million sigh had finally passed through the company's lungs. Attached were the signed indemnity terms, full legal shielding in case this whole circus got dragged into a courtroom, and the reinstatement of my retention bonus with a time-stamped note from finance that read, "Approved and retroactively applied per executive order." My back pay, down to the last cent, was folded in. No fluff, no asterisks, just numbers that should have been there all along. At the bottom of the packet was the board resolution they thought I'd never earned the right to amend. Addendum 18B, simple, brutal, clean. Removal of the designated officer without legal review and documented transition shall trigger an automatic compliance hold across all active certifications. I smiled, just a little, because now it wasn't just about me, it was policy, permanent, and no one would ever be able to do what Tyler did without setting off sirens first. I printed the certificate. One copy, no reprint, blue ink only. The pen clicked in my hand like the last line of a poem finally landing. I signed my name clean and deliberate, Elaine Myers, and slid it into the scan feeder. The system updated automatically. Valid. The auditor's alert came seconds later. Hold lifted, certification acknowledged, buyer transaction may resume. You could feel the pressure valve release through the walls of the call. The buyer's counsel unmuted first. "Thank you," she said, like someone who'd just seen a minefield successfully diffused. "We're resuming funds release." No one cheered. No confetti. Just a heavy, loaded silence that said everything about who had really been holding the weight this entire time. Then HR pinged the executive thread with a soft bullet point. "Schedule Tyler's transition review, 3:15 p.m. calendar sent." He didn't speak. Not a word. Just sat there, pale and shrinking, the edges of his suit starting to look too big for the man inside it. The CEO didn't look at him either. He'd seen enough. Tyler had gone from visionary disruptor to liability in the span of an hour. No apology would save him now. No charm could unburn this. The CEO turned to me and gave a nod, tight, restrained, but real. "Thanks for holding the line," he said. Then, quietly, "We should have done better." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because this moment wasn't about theatrics. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't revenge. It was balance returning to a system that had tilted too far for too long. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The sun had shifted in the window, softer now, and the air finally felt breathable. For the first time in months, I felt still. Not triumphant in a loud way, just still. The rules had held. The truth had held. I had held. And now the ink was dry. 3 days later, I was back in the same boardroom, this time across from a different HR rep and a new legal observer who couldn't make eye contact for more than 2 seconds at a time. They'd cleared the table, dimmed the lights, and laid out a glossy offer folder with a fresh title, something grand and vague like Executive Director of Governance Strategy, complete with a corner office, a dedicated assistant, and a budget line that would make most people jump. But I didn't come for a title. I didn't come for flowers. I came with a different folder. Mine was thinner, plainer, no embossing. Inside it was a consulting retainer agreement. My version, drafted by my attorney. It granted me permanent veto power over all future changes to compliance structure, signing authority, and internal policy enforcement. No committees, no recommendation boards. Just a simple clause. If Elaine Myers says no, it's no. They read it. Legal blinked. HR shifted in her seat. The CEO, who'd flown back in just for this meeting, didn't blink at all. "This is what it takes?" he asked. "No," I said. "This is what keeps it from happening again." He signed. Later that afternoon, a junior analyst, a kid I barely knew, fresh out of school and still calling policy the boring stuff, sent me a DM. "You saved the deal." No emojis, no punctuation, just 5 words that hit harder than any speech. I smiled, archived it, and opened the master SOP template, scrolled past the outdated diagrams, the boilerplate paragraphs no one read, until I reached the first page, the one they had to read when onboarding, auditing, or pretending to care. I added 1 sentence in bold, just beneath the compliance charter header. "Compliance authority is the price of admission." Not a threat. A boundary, a fact, the kind that makes smart people pause before they cut corners. I printed the blue ink copy of the certificate again, just for me this time, and laid it gently on the table. Same desk where Tyler had once smirked. Same place he'd tried to corner me with charm and shortcuts. That room had never held authority, only proximity. The real power had always been in the rules I wrote and the silence I kept until the moment it mattered. I capped the pen, stood, walked out. No balloons, no farewell lunch, just the quiet echo of heels on tile, a retainer locked in, and the comforting knowledge that nothing in that office could move without me letting it. They called me paperwork. That's fine. Paper cuts deep.